So since we didn't meet today, I thought I'd record a little bit of Goffman's stigma theory. Now I know we talked about it in class, but I wanted kind of an official PowerPoint presentation. So Goffman's stigma theory Goffman was a sociology theorist, one of the early sociology theorists, and really was one of the founders of many of our social interaction theories. And stigma theory was his most powerful, and certainly his most long-lasting. Now, in Goffman's words, stigma is an undesired differentness from what we had anticipated. Thus, Goffman continues, by definition, of course, we believe the person with a stigma is not quite human. On this assumption, we exercise a variety of discriminations, through which we effectively, if often unthinkingly, reduce his life chances. We construct a stigma theory, an ideology to explain his inferiority and account for the danger he represents, sometimes rationalizing an animosity based on other differences, such as those of social class. So there's a lot here. Let me unpack it a little bit, because this is the base of his theory. So basically, one can see where, just in the very beginning, where this could apply to science fiction quite well. In that, the base of his theory says that because of some undesired differentness from what society, the normative society, which other critics have called the normates, I'll call normates as well. This idea of what is normal, what is the main culture represents. So Goffman says those that are different are stigmatized, and that with that stigma is this assumption that they're not quite human. They're not like us. And thus, because they're not like us, we have a freedom to discriminate, to reduce their opportunities, to treat them as inhuman, to dehumanize them. And we'll see how this works when we look at some examples. And we're going to start with these guys. And you should recognize all of them. I'm going to see if this can point to them, so you'll see. Here we have Mr. Spock. And I think we talked a little bit in class about this. Mr. Spock is human and Vulcan, and thus is not really part of either world. In the human world, he's considered too rational. In the Vulcan world, he's considered too emotional. Thus, he's stigmatized by both. This is a common type of stigma. In our regular society, our non-science fiction society, we can see this in individuals that are biracial. Barack Obama is a perfect example. Because his mother was white, his father was black, he looks too dark to be able to pass off as white. So he's stigmatized from the white community. But because he was raised within the white community, the black community stigmatizes him as well. And you can read lots of comments about how he's not really that black, and he's not black enough, and all of this type of quantifying of his race. And that's because he's stigmatized by both communities. We've gone over, I think, this guy as well. This is from Futurama, and he's out of time. He's from the past, but into the future. Thus, he also is stigmatized. Doesn't fit what the worldview is of that future. Marvin here from Hitchhiker's Guide will be looking at it a little more closely. He also has this stigma of being a robot, yet with human-like emotions. And not just any kind of emotions. severe depression, a form of mental illness, which we'll see is a type of stigma on its own. And then we have Anakin, who's a slave and stigmatized due to class and the way slavery is treated in that world. So Goffman divides stigma into 3 types. Physical stigma, scars, disability, things like weight, anything that makes you look different, that makes you look not normal. Social, these are the invisible issues, or sometimes we'll even call them invisible disabilities. Mental illness, alcoholism, or really addiction of any kind. Poverty. In the science fiction world, of course, this can spread into many different ways. There's a great Twilight Zone episode in which a woman is trying for her last time to get a procedure to make her look beautiful. And it's this severe desire to be normal that this society puts on their people, to the extent that if this surgery doesn't work, she's going to have to be placed in a colony of people that look like her because they're no longer welcome in the general society. And of course, the Twilight Zone's spin at the end was that she was horribly ugly by our standards. And thus, the audience can look at it and say, wait a second, she's terribly ugly. How could they want to change? Not want her to be changed. She's so ugly, there's no way you'd want to be like that. But of course, in her world, ugly was beautiful. And poverty is a major social issue. We see this all the time. And then we have the tribal, where you have stigmas that separate you, but yet you're allowed to be part of a smaller community and get support from that smaller community. And we can see that in race, we can see it in gender, we can see it in religions. Many ethnic groups tend to live in little ethnic communities. In science fiction, we see this a lot as well. So again, this kind of ability to find solace and comfort in like people. The X-Men's a good example. So Goffman goes on and says one solution was for a category of persons to support a norm, to support what society views as normal, but be defined by themselves and others as not the relevant category, to realize the norm and personally to put it into practice. In other words, kind of like the X-Men. Xavier saves humans from other mutants, but yet really doesn't try to change the way the norm, and doesn't really try to do much for society, but rather just hopes that society will eventually understand. This causes problems in the X-Men universe. Magneto, for example, is always arguing with Xavier that he is letting the humans control him, that they have all this power, they might as well be able to use it, and so on. A second solution was for the individual who cannot maintain an identity norm to alienate himself from the community which upholds the norm, or refrain from developing attachment to the community in the first place. So one solution is this kind of passing off as human and supporting, or passing off as normal and supporting the normal community. The second solution is kind of separating yourself and being away from the normal community. Kind of being a separate society. And, you see those examples as well. People that just want to stay away and be not part of the main world. People that don't want to get involved, that don't want to change anything, they just want to be left alone. Going to the X-Men, we can see these 3 categories. Passing as normal, separating completely. That middle picture, separating completely, is Callista from the Morlocks, which in the X-Men comic books is a group of mutants so ugly they can't pass themselves off as normal. So what happens is they separate themselves and they live in the old New York subway systems and sewer systems, and stay away from the above society. And then we have Magneto with this ability to villainize. So if you can't be part of that world, then you're going to destroy that world. And that's Magneto's end. Other examples, we have Superman trying to pass off as normal. You have the Silver Surfer who tries to separate himself completely. We got the giant cockroach from Men in Black who, want to destroy the world.